Hi everyone, I'm Harold.
And I'm Braden.
And we're here to talk trikes. We've been talking a lot about riding performance, wheels, and whatnot. We've also kind of lightly brushed over another topic that we're going to be talking about today. We want to talk to you about suspension. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, we want to first address why would someone need suspension? What type of riding facilitates the need for suspension? Why do most trikes not have suspension and all that?
I mean, just to get right into it, right? Pros of suspension, right? Seems very obvious. Tends to be a floaty, cushiony ride.
It's a cushy ride. You want to be comfortable. You already have a more comfortable trike than a bike. Suspension's the next step in that comfort rating. Of course, with some trikes, they're going to have suspension that eliminates road vibrations, makes it just a little bit easier to handle. But if you're going for the typical air shock type of suspension, you're just looking to be more comfortable no matter where you're riding.
Right. I mean, comfortability is the name of the game. It's suspension, right? Especially if you're taking it off-road. I do prefer some of the suspension options on the off-road trikes.
Sure.
Right, built for it. AZUB comes to mind, but we can get more into that later. What are some of the cons for suspension? Wouldn't you want suspension?
Why wouldn't you want suspension? The cost, I'm going to say, is going to be one thing. Typically, a suspension trike is going to be more expensive than a rigid trike. If you're looking, I'm going to be doing flat pavement with no issues, my roads are well taken care of, you don't really have a good reason to justify getting suspension. If you're already comfortable enough, then that's not needed. Of course, some suspensions only have a little bit of travel, and if you exceed a certain weight rating, they're going to compress. So you have a certain weight with what suspension you're going to be useful for.
And of course, another obvious, most trikes are not compatible with suspension. So sometimes you just, the trike I like doesn't have suspension. There's no add suspension.
It's good to keep in mind, if the trike you have initially does not have suspension, unless there is a aftermarket kit that is bundled with the trike, it's not going to be compatible with suspension later on, especially if the rear end of the frame is not built around that.
Right. Most cases, suspension is not retrofittable.
There's only one case I can think of where it is. We'll get into that.
Let's just get into that right now. Let's talk specific on suspension.
Sure.
Right? So talking about brands with retrofittable suspension, ICE comes to mind, right? ICE is one of those brands, they kind of unique in the sense that they only use elastomers.
Right.
There are no springs, no shocks. They use elastomers for the front and elastomers for the rear.
Right.
Those that aren't familiar with how suspension works on a trike, suspension's built into the front spindles, and then they tend to be found right behind the seat, give you your back support as well as kind of that road vibration you're going to feel on your hands.
Right.
Elastomers in a lot of ways feel a lot stiffer than a spring. However, I do think they handle the road vibration a lot better.
They do, and ICE has multiple different weights of elastomers that are, for the different weights of riders, they can use that as well. And with the 26-inch rear wheel, they have multiple different positions, multiple different elastomers that you can put in there. It's, with how ICE has it designed, it's a lot more modular with their elastomer system, where with other trikes, it's not going to be, as modular.
As I've been getting more and more involved in trikes, ICE really has become the modular brand. Yeah. Right. Not only are they retrofittable in suspension, but that means that the whole rear end of the trike can be changed to rigid from suspension, and vice versa.
Right.
I think that's really fascinating. You don't find that across brands.
No, typically it's going to be, you got the one trike, it fits all, that's it.
Right. And just to segue into the next brand, what other cat trike model?
There's one cat trike model, the Dumont. They use a mix of they call it a Celasto front suspension. It's just as a rubber block elastomer, and then they have that RockShox Air Shock Monarch. It's not going to be the cushiest suspension out there all the way around, but if you're getting cat trike, that's not really what you're looking for, especially with the Dumont. Yeah, it's going to be more comfortable than the 559, which is the most similar trike. But with that added front suspension and that air shock, if you're looking again on that higher end touring, you're looking for a commuter trike, and you're looking to just be like, I need to eliminate road vibrations. I need to be a little bit more comfortable and just have better handling. The suspension on the Dumont is wonderful for that.
Right, and I'd like to hear you delve into that a little bit more, right? The Dumont doesn't have the softest suspension, but that is on purpose. And what purpose does that serve?
Design. the purpose of not having the softest suspension is to lead into that sportier feel. It's very quick to react, very quick feeling. Of course, it's great to have that little bit of suspension, but it's not gonna weather the storm like if you're going off-roading, which is not what the
I'm not bashing the Dumont suspension. It's great. It feels fantastic.
Right.
But suspension is not always ideal for those faster speeds, right? You want something that gets the straight from the road to the wheels. There's no absorption. It is just go, go, go.
Right.
Nothing's slowing me down.
Right.
And I think the Dumont's one of the better trikes at doing that with suspension.
Absolutely. The whole thing about the Dumont, same thing with the 559, it all just leads to going fast, getting to a place fast, and the Dumont just makes it so you can get there fast and be more comfortable.
Right. And then you talked, the Dumont has an air shock behind the seat.
Right.
This you do find kind of more commonly across the brands. Another brand that uses almost an identical setup with elastomers in the front, air shock in the back. This one uses a spring in the back, the Sunseeker CXS.
Right.
This is by far one of our most popular suspension model trikes.
Yes, it is.
A lot of that has to do with cost, I think, but there are some limitations. So back to what you talked about before, the elastomers can bottom out quickly.
With that front spring you have in there, you only have about 1.25 inches of suspension. If you're above the recommended weight ratings on the CXS, which is 300 pounds, as you start to go further and further above that, the front suspension is going to bottom out, and you basically have rigid spindles at that point.
Right, and like the CXS, those are not adjustable. There are no way to make them increase. So like, case in point, I have a customer that came in the other day, last week or so, 450 pounds. They are not going to like the suspension on the CXS because it is just not going to work for them.
The front suspension. Yeah.
The front suspension, yeah. In fact, we just switched out to rigid
spindles, and it worked just fine.
And it works just fine, right? But unfortunately, that suspension was not tunable for that rider. So it is something to keep in mind. You pointed out that the front suspension was the only thing that didn't work. Why did the rear suspension work?
It has a higher weight rating. When it comes up, it has a 650-pound weight rating, and it is adjustable just by hand, and even with some tools if you need a little bit deeper.
It's a coil spring shock.
It's a coil spring shock. Just take your hand and crank it to where you need it. It's going to, pretty much any weight that you're going to put on the CXS in the rear is going to be fine.
The nice thing about the CXS is coil shock in the rear, unlike its front suspension, is a standard size shock.
So you can use something like a kind air shock or a rock shocks shock system in the rear.
Right. I mean, it's more adjustable. So if you needed to hit those higher weights or even lower, I mean, there's usually an option available to make that happen.
Absolutely. Going from there.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into it. I love AZUB. Let's bring them up. What unique suspension system do their Tie-Fly models have?
The first thing you're going to notice when you see a Tie-Fly is that wacky-looking wings that they have in the front.
The beautiful-looking wings.
Yeah, I love it. It's beautiful. They have shock dampeners built into them as well, so you can get a lot of side-to-side travel while also having the anti-roll resistance that is offered by that titanium front leaf suspension. And of course, you have standard shock capability in the rear. Comes with the D&M coil shock. You can update that to a Fox float, so you can get a lot of suspension travel in the rear. And already you just have a very cushy ride in the front as well.
Right, and I would argue that this brand, the AZUB Tie-Fly models, are built for off-road abuse, similarly to the HP brand, who use a very different, I mean, they don't have the titanium bracket. We go into the HP system as well.
Yeah, they use, similar to the CXS and Ice Trikes, they use a mix of a spring and elastomer front suspension, which gets them a lot of travel without too many issues. They also have that standard D&M coil shock that the CXS has, but they can also do a rock shock in the rear. With that spring and elastomer that you get in the front, you do get a lot of front suspension travel, where with the rear, it's going to feel the most similar to something like a Dumont.
Sure. HP uses a really interesting front suspension, similarly to the AZUB suspension, where they didn't build it into the spindles. They actually use a really complicated McPherson suspension system built into the headsets, which is very similar to a car, right? I mean, very German brand here, right? Make it as most complicated as we can.
Well, they also have those anti-roll bars.
Anti-roll bars.
So it's over-engineered. I'm going to say a little bit overcomplicated, but it gets the job
It,
done.
it
and
does
gets
a
it done
very
really
good
well.
job.
Yeah.
Right. All of that to say, most things the German made, they do a good job.
Absolutely.
It's over-engineered for a reason.
Right.
Not to say it's too complicated. You mentioned earlier that the Dumont, the full suspension cat trike, is not going to be ideal off-road.
Mhm.
I would argue that the last two brands we mentioned do have off-road capabilities. And why is that?
Well, you think about the flagship off-road trikes that AZUB and HP offer.
Mhm.
HP has the Enduro, which is basically just a Scorpion with knobby tires.
Sure.
That gets the job done great. That front suspension they have is made for off-road, on-road. It can do both.
Mhm.
AZUB has the TiFly X, which is a TiFly 26, but with 26-inch front wheels as well, wider rims, wider axles, wider hubs. So it's going to do a lot better for any sort of getting low rolling resistance and riding off road.
Right.
One brand to mention that we don't carry at the moment is going to be Stein Trikes. They are big, heavy duty trikes that have a dual A-arm suspension, where that's really going to be made for taking a trike off road, bombing it downhill and
Right.
jumping it, and
Right.
for that really
That being
rugged
said,
performance.
I wouldn't personally want to jump an HP AZUB trike. These are not made for
to do that. Yeah.
for taking leaps, right? They are off-road use. Take them off-road. Take them off your trail. I wouldn't take them off of a jump.
No. The only thing I'd feel comfortable jumping in are going to be our E-quads, like the 4x4, which are made for that kind of abuse.
Right. I mean, I just heard recently that Chandler, one of our lead mechanics, took it off a 6-foot drop on the 4x4. I mean, that's pretty gnarly.
Did just fine, yeah.
While we're talking about quads, you brought them up, so it's on you now. We have a handful of quads available.
Sure.
Not all of them are suspension quads.
Sure.
Right. We have conversion kits for some of the cat trikes to make them into quads. None of those are the Dumont. So they do not have suspension. It's not something we can put on them.
Right.
The Eco Quad, we can't have suspension on either. Actually, we can put the CXS suspension on
the front suspension.
We put front suspension on
but it
those.
doesn't have any rear suspension. So
Right.
for road vibrations, that's going to be something you'd want to look at in the Eco Quad.
Right. But our E-Quads do have suspension, depending on the model, right? The 4x4, like mentioned before, uses spring suspension in the front and the rear, handles it great. I mean, they're tunable too. So any weight of the rider, we can make it work.
Right.
The E-Quad has rear suspension. We can always add front suspension to them. And it's a very similar suspension that you find on the CXS.
Yes.
But I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on quads.
Yeah, let's start talking about trikes again. We can talk about quads in another video.
Sure.
When we're talking about getting a trike, upgrade options later, and suspension, am I going to be limited in what I can do if I get one trike that doesn't have suspension on it? What sort of upgrade paths do I have there? What trikes do and do not have that as an upgrade option for any sort of suspension?
Right. And, we get asked all the time, I have a trike, it does not have suspension. I'm sure you guys have a kit to add suspension to them. Certain cases, yes, actually.
Perhaps, maybe.
I talked about the Eco Quad briefly.
Right.
That's
built off of the Eco Tad.
Right, built directly off of the Eco Tad. The Easy Tad uses a similar frame. Those are both retrofittable with the CXS front suspension.
Right.
So we can add the front suspension to both those trikes, but we are limited in everything else. Right.
Yeah.
Of course, the ICE trikes, as mentioned before, are very modular. If you are willing to spend the money, we can add front suspension. You can also add rear suspension at a later point.
Of course.
However, there's not a lot of options outside of those.
Yeah, but what about if I have a trike that's rigid and I want to get some sort of push out of that, even if it's not a robust front suspension spindle or anything like that?
Right. So you have a trike now. You've probably already explored the option of suspension.
Sure.
We can add suspension. Other options you can do, just to rip the Band-Aid off, the easiest thing you can do is change the seat, add a more comfortable seat.
Right.
Most brands have comfortable seat options.
There's seat pads. We have our
Right.
Vent-to-Sit pads that we carry.
There's always something you can do to help kind of cushion whatever blow you're trying to, absorb. Another huge thing, and we talked about it last week, tires.
Right.
Fat tires are going to act as a suspension, of course, right? You can tend to run them at a lower PSI. gives them a lot more float.
You don't even have to go to fat. You can go to something like the Big Apple 2-inch wide tires and run those at a lower PSI than a road tire like the Marathon Racer that comes on most trikes. And that's going to act as a sort of suspension, pseudo suspension.
Right. I mean, there are ways to soften the blow. I mean, just to kind of circle back to the very beginning of the video, trikes are already going to be a very comfortable ride for the most part, right? They are undoubtedly more comfortable than a bike.
Right.
So right off the get-go, you have the advantage of comfortability.
Right.
Suspension is really just that added benefit that, you know, if it's available, it's within your budget, and it is something you want, get the trike that has it.
Right. All right, Braden, well, we talked a lot about suspension today and our thoughts and our information that we have about that, but we want to know what you guys think. Why did you choose a trike with suspension? Why did you choose a trike without suspension? And what are your general thoughts about it? Of course, remember to leave that comment below. Check our newsletter. We drop information every Friday, and Hannah runs that, so just send us an email if you want to join up. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, ring that bell. Check our other Trike Talks. We have a slew of other great information on there. And remember to
relax, spin fast, and ride trikes.
That's right. Thank you guys. We'll see you next time.